Okay, so here we have the form and we have the submit button. That in the graphical interface should look very ugly, but it's this. We have the send button. Then we will apply if we have time, we will apply the bootstrap styles to make the form more beautiful. But for now, just for the sake of making it functional, we will leave it this way, okay? Nice. So in this case, how many fields or which fields are we going to need? In the database, we defined that a tutor had a name, a surname. They have a name, a surname, a presentation quote, and a profile image. Okay, so basically 4 fields. So all of the fields up to now are textual fields, no? All of them are requiring some kind of input, but textual input. So as we saw last week, and for each of these elements, we also define two attributes. One is the name, that in this case, an advice is always to give a name depending on the type of element that we are trying to create or the type of information that we are trying to get. So in this case, we are trying to get a text that represents the name. So a good convention for giving a name for this specific element would be txt name, so that we know that's the text field from which we are extracting the name. And we can use the same value for the ID, txt name. What are we missing here in this declaration? The length, yeah. So what was the attribute for the length? Was it like mean length? It was. So for us, which could be like a reasonable mean length for a name? 3 maybe, yeah. And the maximum length might be? Have no idea. 30? A lot? Well, 30. What else? When we created the database, what did we say? Yeah? Required, of course. Because in the database, we said that it must be not null. So since in the backend we declared and we said that this attribute was necessary, also in the backend it should be consistent with that design decision. So of course here is required. What else? Indeed, there is also this option. that it is a different way of expressing what we have done with min length and max length. So that in this case, we are saying that we are expecting the name to be a textual input, that we are not expecting a name, for instance, with numbers, because it won't make any sense. So if we want still to be more strict about the information that we are trying to capture, we can use this pattern attribute. Does it come to your mind any other validation that we can add here in the front end? Maybe not. Let's check how it looks graphically. Okay, so it has this here, insert your name. And boom. So question, what should we add next to the text field? The label. Because even here, if I show a placeholder that gives you an idea of what you are supposed to insert in there, there is always a good practice to add a label next to the field. So let's do it quickly. It should be which information. Okay, so if I create it in this way, I have this. So I already have the name, the label, and I have the text field next to it. But what I'm missing here, I'm missing like a real association between the label and the text field. And that association is done through for txt name. In this way, as you remember last time, we were indicating that this label is associated with this text field. Okay? This association is useful mainly for usability purposes and for accessibility purposes. So that, for instance, now when I click on the label, it selects the field that I'm supposed to fulfill, or the field that I'm supposed to complete. So it works even if I don't declare the for, but when I declare the for, it's like an upgrade that I'm doing on the user experience and then on the accessibility of the site. Okay, so we have name. What was the name, surname, quote, and instead of, let me do something first. Okay. So for the surname, for instance, we can leave like the same validation, like a minimum length of 3 and a maximum length of 30. It is also required, and we also want this pattern to be validated in this case. Then there was like the quote. In the case of the quote, of course, it's different. I don't know why we added this quote, but it was supposed to be kind of a presentation, kind of saying something about himself or about the tutor. So in this case, how do we want to deal with the quote? Maybe in this case, it's not an input anymore, but a text area would make more sense. So it is not just like a text field, but instead of a text field, a text area in which the user can insert the quote. So here we have the name, the surname, and here so the text area, it doesn't have any sense to keep the type attribute, because we already know that it is text, because text area by default we are expecting to get text. These attributes for a text area don't make sense anymore. It might have a placeholder, but instead of this, we might be defining so like this, no? That we create the text area, we anyway say then the name and the ID, that it is universal for each kind of element that we want to add into a form. Then in this case, the placeholder still makes sense even if it is a text area. And here, instead of setting a minimum number of characters and a maximum number of characters, we set like a default number of rows that that text area will occupy. So in this case, I will leave it to 3. Of course, I can still have the minimum and the maximum length attributes, but in this case, it might be more convenient to have just like the row element, so that like here, you can see that we have by default 3 rows that can be used for setting the quote or setting the description. Of course, if the user comes here and write, well, let me. Okay, he can create as many rows as he wants as he continues to write something. So at some point, we can also set like a maximum length, but okay, just for the sake of this exercise, let's keep it simple. And let's say that a quote will have 3 rows. Is it required? Yeah, is it required? Because in the database, we define that specific field as a not null field, okay? The quote. And what are we missing? The profile image. Do you remember what was the, or how could we create the field or the element in the form to upload a file? Because in this case, of course, the profile image is a file that must be uploaded by the users, right? So how do we create the file? Yeah? Sure. Thank you. So input type file. Okay. So as usual, it will have the ID that we might set this. Or let's say this, better like this. What else can we say about that file? Or what else can we specify for that file?
We could filter the type of files with the accept.
Sure. So with accept, we can say .jpeg. What else? Okay. JPG, PNG, and JPEG. Okay. Is the syntax okay? Okay, you tell me. And of course, this field is also required, right? Because we decided that we want each user to register in the website to be forced to upload an image, a profile image. So in this case, it's also required. So if we take a look at this in the browser, it should look like this, okay? Here, if we click on the file, okay, it opens, and yeah, indeed, it just enables us to select files that finish on JPEG, JPG, PNG, as in this case, and well, I don't have any, and this JPEG image, okay? So far, so good, everything is fine. But before we forget that, every time that we want to upload a file within a form, what should we do to make it possible, to enable such kind of behavior? Each time that we want to upload a file, we must adhere in the form declaration a new attribute that is enctype, okay? And in enctype, we must declare this. Because by using this attribute, we are specifying what's going to be the encoding type for the data that we will be sending. So each time that you want to upload a file, don't forget to add this enctype to the form, okay? Questions so far? Okay, so here we still don't have an action. Let me change the name of this to so we created our form in HTML, but we don't still know where to submit the information. So if right now we click on, okay, it will make all the validations, but if we click on send, it won't be sent anywhere. So what do we have to create on the backend? We have to create a route that will handle that submission, that will handle the form that has already just been submitted. How do we create that backend? Well, as a new route. So in this case, okay, so here I create this register route, and here in the action, now I know that there is some route, some endpoint on the backend that will take my request. So here I set this to register. Okay, so the association between the form on the front end and the backend is through this route that will handle my form submission. Okay. What's the first thing that I have to declare here to make it work? To change the method, no? Because by default, the method that this route have is the get method. So it is when I invoke one of these routes is because I am asking these routes to retrieve me the web page or to retrieve me something. So if for instance, I do sign up, I'm expecting this route to retrieve me the registration.html, or to retrieve me the template or the page that is associated with this root. Here is different because we are not trying to retrieve something, we are trying to send something, to submit something. So the method, the HTTP method that applies here is not anymore the get, that is the default one, but which one is the method? What is the method that this endpoint will support? Who said? Louder? The post, no? But is it clear the reasoning behind why this is a post? Because this is a endpoint that is not made for retrieving something, but it is a post to which I can submit something. So I can submit the information on the form. So in this case, this is a post method. Okay. What I'm expecting to receive here, of course, the name. Okay, let's do one by one and then we copy paste. So here, at the first time that I use request, it doesn't work because by default, Flask doesn't come with that imported component. So here we must go here and import request so that it can be used here. And here, if I'm trying to get the value that the user submitted me through a form, which value do I use here? Which parameter value do I use here? I use the same one that I specified here in the form as the name. So it is text name, txt name. Why? Because when I submit the form in the HTTP request, it creates a dictionary in which each field is identified using the value that I set here in the HTML as the name, or associated with the name attribute. So if here I call this one txt name, on there in the backend, when I want to get that value, I use the same name that I gave on the HTML. Name, surname, quotes. Okay, txt quote. And here with the image is slightly different because, as you can see, we're getting the image not anymore from request form, but the images are submitted somehow apart in something like in a dictionary of files, that is request files, in which the identifier or the key is still the same name that we gave here to the image. So if here in the form we set image profile, then here to get the form to fetch the image, we use the image profile. Okay, indeed. Well, let's see if it works. And let me change this because I changed the name of the root. So before it was register, now it is sign up. So here okay, so here we have the registration page. It shows everything, so let's try. Okay, well, first let's try like this, that I haven't uploaded any image. So if I haven't uploaded anything, since I add the front-end validation, if something is missing, it will force me to upload something. Let's say, for instance, that I for instance, if I set the image, but I forget to write the name, or if I write it with a number, for instance, it says it is doing like the front-end validation. Okay, so up to now, we know it is working. Okay. So if I send, I just ask him to retrieve like a message saying works, one, and the information that I just submitted. So up to now, it is working up to that point. I wanted to show you something. Now that we are seeing this topic again. And it is that here, since the upload was successful, it created me, or it uploaded to the backend the image that I passed him, okay? And it uploaded the image with the same name that I uploaded it with, okay? But here we have two issues. On the one hand, I don't want the images to be just added to any location in this way. Ideally, I would want a folder in which I want to save the profile images, for instance. So first of all, this image should not be added here to the root of the project, but it should be added to a specific location. And second case, why do you think it might be an issue to upload the image with the same name that the user, or that each user uploads, with the same file name of the picture, keeping the same file name? Why? Will I be the only user uploading images? Will I be the only user registering? No. Potentially, I can have thousands of users, hundreds of users. And what would happen if another user uploads an image with the same name? It would crash, no? We can't save two images on the same location with the same name, or two files on the same location with the same name. So here, for instance, is something that we must consider, since this is a distributed application that might be used by different users, and we don't have control over the user's actions. We have always to think of ways to mitigate such risks. So of course, we won't leave the same name that the image has, but we will make some modification to make sure that each file or image or resource that a user uploads to our site has a different ID, and that it is different one from the other. So how do you think we might achieve that different names and different IDs? How would you solve that problem? Do you have any ideas? Yep.
Well, either attaching a user ID to the file or storing the file in a different folder to the user.
Storing the file into a different folder, yes, and then saving the image with the name of?
Said attaching a user ID to the file name.
Yeah, that could be an option. So that if I said like profile image 1, I know that that's the profile image of the user with an ID 1. So that's a feasible solution, because we know that each user has one ID, and that that image would have that syntax. What could be the inconvenience with that one? So, okay, yeah.
I guess, for example, it could be a bit trickier to drive the image.
No, not that much, because anyway the image will be saved with that name, and you will be referencing that name from the database, so at the end it's fine.
But also, if we only use that if all the files and other things
Okay, they will be mixed together, all of the same in a folder, for instance, but anyway, each one of them will have a distinct ID, so it would be fine. Because in that case, I would imagine like a folder with thousands of images, all of them named the ID, ID dash profile image, something like that, which might be fine. There might be an issue with that one.
Maybe we can create a table for images, and every time we store an image, we assign an ID.
Yeah, somehow, but in that case, the image won't belong to the user or won't belong to a user record, but would be like into a different table,
Yes.
right?
And from the table of the user, there will be a referral to the image.
Okay, I would agree with that one, but in the case that a single user has more than one image, no? Because by having it in a different table, we will be referencing that image to a table.
But just one image.
Yeah, but in that case, how would we, I mean, the fact of having the image into a different table, how would it solve like the naming issue? Because what we want to prevent is that two users might be uploading an image with the exact same name. You know, so we might think of a mechanism so that two images won't have the same name. And we don't have any control over the name that the users want to assign the image. With the ID, so yeah, we can still play with the ID. The only issue with the ID is that if I open any website, well, this is a silly example, but I wanted just to say, for instance, if I come here and any user, okay, Luigi Rossi. So if, for instance, I come to his profile and I save this image, for instance, here you can see that it has like a code that we can't understand, that doesn't have any semantic for anyone that is accessing the page, okay? But if we add that semantic of the ID of the user within our database, we are giving sensitive, technical sensitive information to any user, to potentially any user. Because if someone comes to our site and tries to download an image, they might be already knowing what's the ID of the user within our database. So ideally, we want to keep that as hidden as possible, the information and the technical background behind our implementation and behind our design. So here, ideally, we don't want to give any hint or any semantic on the name that could potentially open safety issues, okay? So that's the reason why the ID, although it works technically, might not be like the best option in here. So instead of that, one option that many people use is using the timestamp. No, because the timestamp is like the current date in which the picture has been uploaded, but in milliseconds. So it is almost impossible that two users upload the image in the same exactly millisecond. So that's a good option. And in that case, we're not giving any hint or any information about how we deal with the information. Or there is a method that I will show you. That is by using this library. Okay. Let me check how this one works. Here we did a mistake because with the pattern that we set, all of the characters must be one next to the other one, so we must fix that. Okay, so it worked. But no. Let me check something. Okay, I have to check that specific method, and next class I will show you specifically how to change the name of the picture, so that it can have a different format, and we are not saving the image like with the original file name, because this one seems not to be working. Yeah, because it is still saving the image with the same file name. So we still have this to do. Okay, we'll keep that as an issue, but something that we can do right now is to change the path of the image. So we don't want the image to be saved in the root of the project, but we ideally want it to be saved into a static into a folder that should be dedicated to the images. So instead of saving them here, we would want the images to be saved in here, for instance. Okay, we already had images, so let's say, for instance, static images, profile images, which means that here I should be having a new folder called profile. So that here in profile images, he uploads the images in this case. So they are not anymore here in the root of the project, but that they are in a specific location within the backend, okay? So up to now, let's keep this in mind, that the images should not be saved anywhere, but into a specific location. And next class, I will check out what's the specific method and function to change the name of the files so that each file has a different name. Okay, questions so far? Yeah. No, because in here, when I ask, here I got the image, right? I have the image that the user has sent me and that is stored, let's say, in this list in this dictionary of files. Okay, so to the image that the user has submitted me, I can ask information about that image. So I can ask for the file name of the image. That in that case should be like juan.png, because it's the original name that the user has given to that image. The difference is that when I save the image, I don't want to use that file that original file name anymore, but I want to use a modified file name set by me. Okay? So I get the image with the original name the image comes with, and then I assign a different image when I save it into my location. Okay? Is that the question? So how do we get sure that the file name was modified? Is the question?
No, so if we had to use the file name,
Okay. Sure, no, because we are missing the other part. That is, all of this data, we have to store all of this data in the database. Okay? So in the database, we will create a new row with the name, with the surname, with the code, and with the image file name, okay? So that information, I mean, we use that name to create the file and to store the file into the file system, but also the same name that we have given to the file, we will use it and we will store in the database, okay? Okay, so on the back end, on the front end, we are done because we have created the form and the form works. Send the information here. So what's the next step here? Let's keep it simple. Okay, so what's the next step here? What should we do with the information that we got from the form? Insert it into the database, okay? How do we insert this into the database? Basically by, we follow like the 5 standard set of steps, just that in that case, it won't be for select, but it will be for insert. What option do I have with this code? I have the option of copy pasting this, copying that code, and pasting that code here in this function. Okay, that would be like my first instinct. But there is a problem with that approach, because in that case, we're mixing so many concerns and so many things within the same function. because within this function we are dealing with information coming from the front end, and if we paste the code to access the database and store things in the database, we are on the same function mixing code concerning the front end and mixing code concerning the back end. So at some point it will become a mess. And in this case, it is just for a very simple function of creating a user. But if the function were more difficult or more complex and we had to mix information from two queries or something like that, it would basically be super confusing. So the approach here and the good practice, and what we are going to do in this course is this. So in our root folder, we will create a new file, and we will create a new file for each or per each instance in the database, okay? Typically, that's like the reasoning that we will be using. So if we have an instance in the database for the tutors, then we will create a file for the tutors. If other than that, we have an instance for the students, that is an instance in the database is reflected as a table, students, then we will have a different file for the students, okay? So here in this case, since we have an instance and we have identified that in our application, we will need to represent an instance that is the tutors, and we created a table that is called tutors, then here we will create a file that is called tutors, okay? But we will create this file with these 3 characters that I don't know if you have seen them before. DAO, haven't you heard of that? Okay, I think it is something gotten from object-oriented programming, but it represents like data access object, something like that. But the idea is that it is a file or an entity that will help us to deal with the information regarding this specific entity. So all the functions that will be useful for dealing with the data associated with this entity tutors will be inserted in this file. So in that way, we try to divide the responsibilities of the files, and that a single function doesn't do everything, but that we split concerns. That in software engineering is something super important, splitting the concerns and assigning each element or each component of our project a specific responsibility, instead of keeping one function that does everything. So it will be saved as tutorsDAO.py, because at the end it's a Python file. Okay, so this is a convention. This is not something technically meaningful, or if you created it with this name, will happen something technically, but this is just a convention. So tutorsDAO.py. Okay. What are we going to do in this? Or let me show you what I will do here, and then you explain me what I did. Name, surname, quote. Here I must use the same names that I gave in the database. So here it was name, surname. Presentation was called, I called it in the column as presentation, not quote. And profile image. Okay, so what did I do? Did you see what I do or what I achieved with the DAO file? I basically split the concerns, no? So the concern to communicate and to interact with the database, I split all of that concern and all of that functions into a different file that was the tutors functions. And now from my app.py file, what do I do when I need something from the database? Do I write all of the function there? No, instead of that, I invoke a function that has already been implemented in that DAO file, and I simply use that function. Why is this approach also practical? Because let's suppose that we have a different function here. Well, let's suppose that for my history, I need to know what is the list of all the tutors in the platform. I don't know why, but let's suppose that in a different function, I also need the same information of all the tutors. Without doing this split, what would I have in this case? Replicated code that does exactly the same thing as in another function that gets all of the tutors from the database. So if instead of writing all of the functions to deal with the database here directly in the app.py, I write it into a different file, I can also reuse these functions among different routes, okay? So if in a route I need to get all of the tutors, then I can reuse the functions that I have declared here. And also, when you will be implementing like the final solution, the design process will be like first designing the database and then building these DAO files. Because when you will be building the DAO files, you will be checking if all of the functions that you are implementing in the DAO files are enough for satisfying all of the requirements, or if you still can't satisfy all the requirements with the information that you have on the database, okay? So don't forget this. Our approach will always be bottom up. We will start from the database. Then we will first design the database. We will identify the entities and the relationships. And once we have like our first version of the whole database, we will think of the functions that we will build upon the database, that are the functions that will be created in these DAO files, okay? And once you have created these functions, you should ask yourselves, does all the functions that I have defined in this file are enough for satisfying the functional requirements of the application? If the answer is yes, you can continue with the development of the front end. If the question is no, then you have to take a look at the design of the database, or if you have to implement a new function to fetch useful data from the database in order to fulfill all the requirements. Is this clear? Why did we create this DAO file, and why it is useful, and why it is practical, and how you should think of the design and development of your solution? Does it make sense? Okay, questions? So here, what we did is call the function that creates a new tutor in the database. And when we open this function, it's basically what we have done so far. Insert a user with the parameters that we are passing here. Just one advice, please be careful with the names, because for instance, in the database, we create this column as presentation, but here in the front end, we have been talking always about quote. So my advice is try to keep it as consistent as possible between the names that you give on the backend to the database and the names that you use on the front end for the forms and for whatever, so that it doesn't make any confusion. Let's see if it works. So here we go to our registration. check. Ah, here, no. Here I was doing something wrong because I didn't want to pass the profile image as the parameter, but the file name of the profile image. You know what I mean? It's different. Let me reload because I think it. Let me check something. Rename, surname, quote, profile image. What I'm missing? What's the mistake here? Values. I forgot like half of the query. So here is values. Okay, with the 4 placeholders. Why 4 placeholders? Because here we're passing 4 values. Okay. Okay, it says it works. I'm here basically printing some silly message to show something, to see if it arrives to this point. And how do I know if it worked? Because now, in my database, in the tutors table, I should be seeing the information that I have just inserted. And here, indeed, I have Juan, science, this is my quote. And the question that you asked me before, what are we going to save here? We are going to save the name of the file. So in this case, the name of the file was juan.jpg. Okay? But after we will do the modification next week, it won't be juan.jpg, but it will be as the one that we saw on LinkedIn, like a code or like a UUID that no one can infer what it says. But this is what we are going to save, okay? So that next time we will see that when we show the list of tutors, we will be able to load and to show the image corresponding to the tutor because we have the file name that we need to show, okay? Is it clear the whole process of getting the data from the form, of sending the data to the backend, then in the backend saving the data into the database? Any questions? Okay, this is super important because this is basically like the most complex part of the application that you will be implementing. If we think of this, basically the exam is something more difficult, but technically at the end is something like that. If I ask you, please, the application should register a new user, it's basically what we have done so far. A new user has the possibility to book a space or to book something. Then the booking is something like this, no? At the end, a booking is a change that you perform on the database to insert a new record that represents a booking. The user can buy tickets. At the end, the acquisition of a ticket is also something like this. So, basically, technically, what we will be dealing with in the implementation of a web application is with this, okay? Okay, so if there is no questions, we can stop here and see you on Monday.